Hey guys, this is my 60-day review on the Razer Blade 17 2022 model. This particular model I have right now in my hands is the 4K panel with the 144Hz display, an RTX 3080 Ti, and a 12900H processor. So this thing has been a workhorse for the time being, and I've been really enjoying using it. There's just a few nitpicks I have against this particular model, and I'll get into them one by one. So let's just start with the build. I've tackled the build way too many times on the Blade series, whether it's the Blade 15 review that I did recently and one of the 3 videos I've made on the Razer Blade 17 already. So with that being said, I'm just going to kind of breeze through it. The build quality is still the best. It is a bit of an older design, but if you haven't really experienced the Blade series in the past, then I think you're going to be in for a treat. There's nothing else that's still quite like it. I think the Gigabyte Aero 16 comes close. I haven't tried the Aero 17, but I expect that to be similar. That's the 2022 model that they redid. I think the build quality is even better than the X17, which I just got in, and it's better than the GE76, which I've been daily driving for a long time as well too. And another thing that's really special about this device is the speakers. The speakers are among the best. The Blade 17 probably sounds the best. Not probably, it does. It's a lot more clear, it's clean, and I think the Scar 17 might still be a little bit better just in terms of the low end. But one reason why I feel the Blade 17 speakers sound the best is because it just sounds natural. And I've used even the MacBook Pro 16 with the M1 Pro or even the M1 Max, but still, I'm talking about the speakers, so they'll probably sound the same. I feel like there's always like a bit of a reverb added to it or some kind of sound processing which can make it sound more dynamic and more full, but there's still something artificial about it. The Blade 17 doesn't experience any of that. It sounds natural and clean. It almost just sounds like you're listening to a good old pair of stereo speakers. But with the THX Magic, you're getting like a full sound stage. If I was playing a little bit of Far Cry 6 and I'm able to hear birds in the sky. When I play competitive shooters, I'm actually able to get a bit of like some positional listening in terms I could be able to almost pinpoint footsteps. Not as good as a headset. I'm not going to say it is, or an actual dedicated surround sound system, but it's doing a really good job. Considering that all of the components, all the speakers are limited to a thin chassis as such as this. So I've been really happy with the speakers. And another thing that's been really impressive is the display. This 4K 144Hz panel is amazing. I'm not going to go into a detailed analysis because I did a dedicated video on that, which I'll link to the bottom of this video. But what I will say though is this panel is bright, the contrast is amazing, and you're getting a really good color gamut. In terms of comparing it to maybe the GE76, I think that they're very similar displays, but you're getting the benefit of 144Hz versus 120Hz. And compared to the X17, that one seems like it only maxes out at 400 nits based off of my initial measurements. But where that does kind of get a little bit of a lead is the X17 has advanced Optimus and G-Sync, and even a 4K 144Hz, I do experience some screen tearing here and there, a decent amount. After playing on QHD 240Hz, you do kind of notice going back to 144Hz, but the benefit is you're getting a 4K display. So if you're okay with occasionally a little bit of screen tearing, then this is probably still one of the best panels out there. In terms of the QHD panel on the 17-inch, from what I remember, that was an excellent panel too. The only issue is it just didn't get as bright. And that's kind of the same how it's been for every laptop display I've been looking at. If you end up with 4K, you're getting a luscious bright panel. But if you go with QHD, 240Hz, you're missing out on some brightness, and you lose a little bit of the color volume compared to the 4K, not by much. I think the good sweet spot right now is the M16, which has a 165 hertz panel with 500 nits of brightness. The only thing is, though, that is a 16 by 10 display, and that's not always the best display for gaming. So I don't think we're at the stage right now in 2022 where one particular laptop has a perfect display. I still think that there's trade-offs depending on which panel type you go with. So with that being said, it's hard for me to make a decision myself. And I ended up getting the GE76 with the QHD panel, and I sometimes find myself going back and forth between the two of them, trying to decide which one I would like to keep for myself long term. And I haven't been able to make a final decision yet. I think for you, just try to determine what you'll be using your display for most. If you're playing a lot of games, then I would still probably recommend the QHD panel. For everything else, if you're playing a lot of single player games, if you're playing RPGs, or if you're playing with a controller, then definitely go with the 4K panel. I would say for any kind of mouse and keyboard type of game, the QHD panel will serve you better. So I think that's going to cover it for the display. And the keyboard, let me just touch on that really quickly. I've gotten used to it pretty much completely, and it's the same keyboard that's on the 15-inch, so I've been using that and then immediately coming over to this, and I feel right at home. I've typed up a lot of my notes for this particular review, and I've been typing on Reddit and YouTube and just trying to get really accustomed to this keyboard, and I have. The only time I really start to notice how shallow the keys are is when I compare it to something like the X17, which has that Cherry MX keyboard. And if I was to do that, then this keyboard would not stand a chance competition wise. And even the GE76 and the Scar has a better keyboard than this. But if the keyboard is semi-important to you, I think you'll still be okay. I do like that there's a control function and alt button on the right hand side. It just makes it easier to get to some of the keys instead of them only being on the left side of the keyboard. So that's a nice little touch that I haven't been seeing on other laptops. I also do like that the secondary buttons are illuminated, like the function and also the volume up, down, etc. I've noticed on the X17 that I'm using now that those secondary buttons are not illuminated, and I can't see them at night, so I have to like tilt the screen down, and it's just kind of annoying. So I do like that additional touch that Razer has, and that's not something that they've always had in their laptops. So that's one thing about this build being older. They've had a lot of time to refine it, and I think they almost have it to a point where it's really close to being the most fully fleshed out machine overall. And just quickly on the different performance modes, only use custom when you're gaming. That's the only way you're going to be able to maximize the full potential of this laptop, and you'll be able to get 165 watts on the GPU, which I have been seeing. So with that being said, I guess I can just talk about some of the performance numbers I've been seeing. So I have updated these numbers compared to when I first got the Razer Blade 17, just to see if there's any funny business, to see if there's if they updated a software to lower the performance, and some laptops have been known to do that. So I'll just start with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. At 4K, I'm getting 47 FPS, 1440p, I'm getting 71, and at 1080p, I'm getting 88. And as you can see, those are identical scores to the GE76 and the GE66. So that's just going to show that the difference between 150 watts, 165 watts, and even 175 watts aren't really making that much of a difference. And in terms of this particular title, not at all. You do kind of notice some difference in the 1% lows. And I think that's because there's some thermal constraints on the Blade 17. And if I was to compare this to the Razer Blade 15, you are getting a bit of a lower performance compared to that. Okay, so next I want to talk about Shadow of the Tomb Raider. And I know there's a lot going on here because I've tested a lot of laptops. On the Razer Blade 17, I'm getting 134 FPS on 1080p, 111 FPS at 1440p, and 63 at 4K. And as you can see, that slots in very closely to the GE76, which is 175 watts. So again, I'm not seeing any difference between the 165 watts and the 175, and I have retested these recently too. If I was to compare this to the Razer Blade 15, you're getting a decent amount less frames compared to that. The Razer Blade 15 is a thinner chassis after all, and the GPU only goes up to 115 watts on paper. Realistically, the Razer Blade 15 hovered around 100 and 105 watts mostly. Okay, so next I want to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy, and this is one of the newer titles I've been testing. I like testing this particular game because you're able to use ray tracing and DLSS. So I'm testing at DLSS quality and with ray tracing on the maximum settings for every different type of ray tracing available to me. On the Razer Blade 17 at 1080p I got 111 frames per second. At 1440p I got 96 frames per second, and at 4K I got 56 frames per second. But overall, again, I'm not seeing much different scores compared to the GE76. And again, it is beating the Razer Blade 15 by a good amount. Enough to make a difference when you're playing. And now let's talk about Red Dead 2, the game that I'll probably never finish. I just slowly keep on chucking away at it. But regardless of that, on the Razer Blade 17, I retested this, and I got very similar scores to the first time. So with that being said, it's just 96 FPS and 1080p, 1440p was 79, and 4K was 60 FPS. Okay, so now I want to touch on the temperature. I know I hinted at that a little bit. The GPU kind of hovers around like the 80s, 82s when it's being fully loaded. I don't mind that, but the CPU will spike up to 100 degrees when gaming, and then it'll start to throttle down. That's why you're seeing a bit lower of the 1% lows in some of the games I've tested, and even the average FPS compared to some of the other thicker laptops I've tested out. I think that's to be expected because this is a bit of a thinner chassis. I don't know how the X17 will do, but again, it's hard for me to compare that one because I have a 3070 Ti in that one. The throttling of the CPU doesn't really bug me too much. I think that's kind of expected for a unit like this. Maybe next year they can increase the vapor chamber even more, or maybe they could start applying some kind of liquid metal like they do with the GE76 and with the ROG series. So I think that's something that they can improve on in the future. The CPU performance is a little bit underwhelming in gaming, and even in creative tasks, I do notice some slowdown, and then I would quickly have to like take a look at the temperatures, and I'll see like, oh wow, we're at 100, so it's throttling down. That's kind of why my performance seems to take a little bit of a dip when I'm photo editing or video editing or doing any kind of intense task that I'm not seeing on something like the G76 or even the Scar 15. So I do feel like the CPU performance is a bit underwhelming, but I don't know. It's not enough of a detractor for me to not recommend this. It's just one of those things where it is what it is. And if I wasn't comparing so many laptops, I don't even think it would bother me or I would even notice it unless I'm staring at temperatures all day long, which I try not to do. I try to really use my laptops and make them a part of my life and not let these details detract me from liking a product. I'm not trying to defend this laptop too much. If the CPU performance is important to you and if you want to experience throttling when gaming, then this just probably isn't the right device for you. Then you can probably just go with it with one of the thicker chassis like the GE76 or the Scar 15 or the Scar 17. Okay, so if I'm talking about thermals, and I kind of do need to talk about the noise a little bit, it's not as bad as all their blades have been in the past, and even compared to other laptops, it seems like it's right along the line. They're all hovering between 57 and 60 decibels, and this doesn't sound any better or worse than the other ones, except for maybe that I'm not hearing any fan noise. I'm just kind of hearing the air move through. What I mean by fan noise is sometimes you could hear the motor or you sometimes hear like a whining sound, or if the acoustics aren't tuned properly in the device, you hear a loud hissing sound, which I'm not experiencing any of that here. All I'm able to discern is air flowing in and out of this chassis. So and I think the vapor chamber is doing a really good job. And one thing I do like about this is that there's no vents on the side. So if I'm using my mouse, I'm not getting hot air blowing on my hand where my mouse is, and sometimes that's distracting. So with that being said, in conclusion, there's some cons. The battery life isn't good. The CPU performance, and it's also heavy. It's over 6 pounds versus the Razer Blade 15, which is like 4.7 pounds. But the GE76 and the X17 are around the same weight, so I don't want to give it a knock for that. It just seems like all of these high-performing 17-inch laptops tend to be a bit heavy. So I just think that's just part of the way it goes when it comes to these laptops. But if you don't want to spend the Razer money, you can get all the laptops that are just as good, if not better, in every sense except for the premium materials. So with that being said, please give this video a like if you made it this far, and please subscribe to my channel. I have a lot more content coming. Thank you guys. Bye.